Hello, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I want to talk to you about the problem with never-ending stories. No, not that one necessarily, though it does fall within the boundaries of today's topic. In so much as a good story is good because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You learn something as the characters move through the story and through their world. You can see character development and growth, loss, tragedy, triumph. All these things happen because things change, and that change is often measured by the end point compared to where the story begins. It is the lens through which we can observe the characters, something indeed of ourselves, and indeed maybe the world around us can be reflected in the fact that we all experience beginnings, middles, and ends. But in recent days, I've become very aware that I think I have a problem with a lot of stories that are being told these days, because they are designed to be never-ending stories. They have, therefore, by definition, no focus, no target, and possibly nothing of meaning to say. It's funny, growing up in our house, my mum was obsessed with three soap operas, the three main soap operas here in the UK. There was EastEnders, which now looking back is just a constant misery fest. There was Coronation Street, which now looking back is just a constant Northern fest. And there was Emmerdale, which now looking back is just a constant Yorkshire fest. And she watched these things almost religiously. She was constantly up to date with this unfolding narrative that just never stops. In some ways, the places of these soap operas are fixed. Not much actually happens or changes. In other ways, things have to happen and change because new actors come in, new technologies emerge, things like mobile phones and the internet, etc. And so there's no real focus. It just meanders and never quite stops and just keeps on going and going and going. And the whole point of its existence is to continue existing. And therefore, it feels like it's just it's junk food in terms of story, in terms of plot, in terms of narrative, in terms of what we can learn from it. It's a mirror, perhaps. They act as a mirror, maybe. Soap operas, they reflect, as I say, things like technologies, fashions of the day. But do they actually enrich us as people who are listening to the story, who are experiencing the story? This thought has really come about in the past couple of days because I've been seeing TV spots for the second half of Jodie Whittaker's latest and final series as Doctor Who, and I kind of stopped watching really with Jodie, and I was petering out with Peter Capaldi, but with Jodie in particular, because the fan base became massively toxic. I couldn't observe a show and then look at reviews or conversations about the show without seeing people frankly bitching and moaning about the fact that she's a woman, or that there's man-hating going on, or politics, or blah 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 blah. People were looking for reasons to hate it. And the most recent advert I've seen for the show, I think the series is called Doctor Who Flux, perhaps, and there's a sort of purple bluish skeletal type character in the adverts. I don't know, but this is a problem that I identified not just with Jodie Whittaker's tenure, and incidentally I did like the first few episodes I saw of her time as the Doctor, but actually under Stephen Moffat, the previous showrunner, there was a similar issue that I've identified previously as a lack of respect for world building in this instance. Moffat would throw out simple facts about the Doctor, what the Daleks did and didn't know about him, whether or not they knew he existed at all, what characters had learned or lost or loved would change depending on what the story apparently required. There was no sort of middle, and there was no development towards an end in that sense in the story. It was just a constant series of beginnings. With Doctor Who, it seems we've got to a point where all you ever know in any given episode is that the Doctor is present. The Doctor is here and probably has an assistant or two around him or her. things will happen. And that's not satisfying. That's just not satisfying. And I think that this has also come about in, obviously, Star Wars, for example. The difference between, I suppose, in that instance, between a saga and a franchise. A saga has a grand operatic story to tell. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a plan baked into the narrative, and it's more often than not somewhat instructive about, broad themes of good and evil and this kind of thing. A franchise simply has to keep on setting up for the next part with no definable end in sight. No, I would argue, no real function other than to be observed and to be consumed in that sense. And now I've sort of repeated myself a few times there in subtly different ways, I guess, haven't I? I've talked about soap operas, Doctor Who not really having a focus, and the difference between sagas and franchise. And I suppose I've just been to see a symptom of this in the form of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Why couldn't we just leave it be? Why did we have to have another Ghostbusters film? The 2016 movie wasn't tremendously well received by the fandom, and so they just had another whack at the pinata in that sense. Why do we have such a problem with stories that end? Presumably, the answer's money. There you go. You can click off the video. You can go away. The answer is presumably money, and the fact that these days we consume stories. We like a soap opera, want to keep up with the, with the Reylo kind of thing. We want to ship characters. We want to see whether fan theories pan out, and that is fun in its own way. And I suppose the MCU, while it's starting to become a little bit boring to me, has been an excellent and continues to be an excellent example of this, especially as they spread out into TV shows. They can play with narrative structure and add to a broader tapestry. But I think for the MCU to have meaning, it's going to have an end at some point. And if that end wasn't end game, then it has to be somewhere. It has to be at some point. And it reminds me of, I suppose, in the early 20th century, there was a similar tendency with movies and franchises. Some of these movie franchises went on for 20, 30 films or more, where characters would come back into films, and the Universal monster movies was an example of interwoven character appearances and cameos. But they all fall out of fashion because we can't have just never-ending stories. I think we need endings to give these stories meaning and purpose. Now, ironically, I haven't really got an end point in mind for this video, in so much as I've just been thinking about this morning, and this problem, this discomfort that I have with never-ending stories, and with this need to always add to the franchise, always add to the next season, to find the new showrunner, to recast, to reboot, to reframe, to alter otherwise well told stories. And I suppose one of the holdouts against that has been The Crow, actually. I'm really happy to see that The Crow remake keeps on hitting a bit of a brick wall. Either the actor loses interest, there's creative differences in the pre-production, or possibly just because they realise that they can't actually do it. They can't actually retell that story in a way that's going to be satisfying, and they keep on just hitting that wall, and it keeps on stopping. And so maybe for me, something like The Crow, if we ignore the sequels that followed, is a good example of a story that is just told, and that is shareable, and is in that sense timeless, because it's not something that we're going, what's the end? When's it going to come to a conclusion? It's something there's a packaged old school story, beginning, middle, end, character development, and a pattern that we can observe over the course of that narrative. I am just rambling now, aren't I? Well, what do you think? What do you think of this notion of stories that have no end? I suppose one more example would be graphic novels. Actually, I prefer graphic novels, collected trade volumes, because they've actually collected together a contained narrative arc in a book, in a single book. It's not just constantly flipping between, you know, the Amazing Spider-Man and you know, Ultimate Spider-Man, and you know, and never ending. It's a story that is contained within the covers of that book. There's a possibility here as well that maybe I'm just being old-fashioned. Maybe this is just how stories are these days. Stories will never end because the market demands it, because the fan base will keep on consuming it, and because, you know, actually endings can be quite depressing. An ending is a confrontation more often than not with something. If nothing else, is a confrontation with the fact that you have to move on and find another story to read or to watch or to listen to. Maybe that's the issue, actually. Maybe storytelling has changed, and we're just in this never-ending, continually growing but never really reflecting way of telling stories. I don't know. Well, what do you think? This is in that sense a reflection, and I suppose it's probably quite fitting that it has no particular end, because it's a very open-ended question and thought, and one which I'm still very much constructing myself. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about stories that seemingly never end? And when those stories do end, for example, with the final series of The Walking Dead, when that comes to an end, I think next year, will that be okay? Will that be satisfying? Or is it just a case of stories now continue until they're told to stop? Is that what's happening with The Walking Dead? Oh, well, you know, the ratings are going down, we can't keep on finding the budget for this, so you just have to stop. And don't even get me started on Firefly in that sense. Yeah, what do you think? Comment below, let's have a conversation. I think that's something that I've become very uncomfortable with. Stories and maybe videos that have no end. Okay guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.